The wind swept across the flat plains of Montana like a whisper from the past, dry and unrelenting. Dust kicked up in lazy swirls, catching in the wooden slats of the barn and the worn shingles of the McAllister ranch house. The sun, high and golden, cast long shadows behind the corral fences. Cattle lowed in the distance, unconcerned by the rhythm of the man who walked among them with silent precision. Grant McAllister rose before dawn, as he always had, and began his day without a word. His boots found the same grooves in the porch steps they had for years. His hand, calloused and broad, wrapped around the coffee mug that had once belonged to his wife. He didn't look at it, not anymore. It was part of the routine, like the creak of the floorboards beneath him, the hiss of bacon on the pan that now came from his own hand instead of another's. 5 years had passed since Evelyn's last breath left that house quieter than death itself. Cancer had taken her slow, cruel, like a thief who knew the way to the front door and took their time ransacking everything inside. She had been his laughter, his rhythm, the light to the rough edges of his character. And when she went, Grant had let the door of his heart close behind her, bolted and boarded over with grief. The ranch didn't pause for sorrow, though. Cattle still needed herding. Fences still needed mending. Bills still needed paying. So Grant did what he'd always done. He worked. He poured his pain into the soil, into every nail and gate latch, until all that was left was a man shaped by routine, sharpened by silence. His ranch hands respected him. They worked hard, said little, and gave him a wide berth when his gaze turned distant and gray. They were loyal to the man and to the land, but no one dared speak the name of the woman who had once danced barefoot across that porch or filled the kitchen with music and the scent of wild honey biscuits. It was Cal, his foreman and friend since boyhood, who finally said something. "You're gonna die out here, Grant," he said one morning over a busted gate. "Not from the work, but from the silence. You need someone in that house. You need a cook, at least. Someone to keep the walls from swallowing you whole." Grant had muttered something non-committal, but the words clung to him. By the end of that week, the ad was written. He kept it simple, practical, just a few words printed in the corner of the local Gazette. Cook needed at Lone Pine Ranch. Room and board provided. Must work independently. He mailed it with little expectation. Maybe someone from town would answer. Maybe they'd stay a week, a month. Long enough to make the place less cold. He didn't need company, just hot meals in a clean house. That's what he told himself. But the day she came, she didn't arrive with a tray of baked goods or a resume in hand. She arrived in a cloud of road dust, her dress clinging to the edges of a worn travel coat, a satchel slung over one shoulder, and a little boy clinging to the hem of her skirt. Grant had been on the front steps, adjusting the latch on the screen door, when he saw the wagon come into view. It wasn't one of theirs. Too small, too slow. It creaked with age, and had no horse hitched now, only a tired mule and a driver who looked like she might slide off the seat from exhaustion. The woman brought it to a stop and climbed down with stiff limbs. Her face was dusty, eyes shadowed from the sun, but alert. Determined. "Mr. McAllister?" she asked, voice soft but steady. He rose slowly, wiping his hands on a rag tucked into his belt. He nodded. "I'm Claire Davison. I came about the position." Grant's eyes dropped to the boy beside her. The child looked to be 4 or 5, cheeks smudged, eyes wide beneath a mop of unruly brown curls. He clung to his mother's coat, peeking around her thigh with curiosity and uncertainty. "I posted for a cook," Grant said plainly. "I can cook," she replied, already lifting the satchel off her shoulder. "You came with a child." "Yes, sir." "I didn't post for a family." Claire swallowed. "I understand, but I didn't come to ask for charity, just a chance." He studied her, arms crossed. Everything in him bristled against the intrusion. This was not what he'd asked for. A child in the house would mean noise, questions, reminders of what was lost. And a woman. Her presence would rattle the ghost of Evelyn in every corner. But something about the way she stood there, tired but unyielding, frightened but refusing to bend, stirred something deep and uncomfortable in him. Pride, maybe, or memory. "You have experience," she nodded. "I've worked kitchens in Kansas City, boarding houses mostly. I can cook 3 meals a day, keep a pantry stocked, and I clean well. And the boy? He keeps to himself. He's quiet mostly. His name's Teddy." At the sound of his name, the boy lifted his head and looked up at Grant. Those eyes, startling blue like a winter sky, met Grant's for a flicker of a second. Then he gave a tentative wave, unsure, small. Grant exhaled sharply, caught off guard. "I'll give you a week," he said, already irritated with himself. "Trial only. You cook, you clean, you keep the boy out from underfoot. If it doesn't work, you move on." Claire didn't smile, but something in her shoulders loosened. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That's all I ask." He turned without another word and pushed the screen door open. It groaned slightly on the hinges. Claire lifted Teddy into her arms, and they crossed the threshold into the house that hadn't known warmth in half a decade. The first thing she did was take off her coat and wash her hands. Then she tied back her hair and made a grocery list. That evening, she cooked fried chicken with fresh herbs, mashed potatoes with brown gravy, and green beans with a touch of salt pork. Grant ate in silence, watching her out of the corner of his eye as she stood behind the stove, cleaning as she went. Teddy sat on a stool in the corner, legs swinging, nibbling a piece of cornbread. He didn't speak much, but he smiled shyly at the ranch hand who passed through the kitchen to grab coffee. That night, as Grant sat in his study pretending to read, he heard Claire humming quietly as she washed dishes. Not a song he recognized, not Evelyn's songs. Something different. Something soft. He didn't like the way it made the air feel. The next morning, the kitchen smelled of cinnamon. Teddy was playing quietly with a carved wooden horse one of the ranch hands had given him. Claire was already prepping the midday meal. Grant entered the kitchen, reached for coffee, and found the pot full and hot. "Made that fresh," she said without looking up. He nodded stiffly. "Thank you." By the third day, the pantry was organized. The curtains were washed, and the house no longer smelled of dust and ash. Teddy had drawn a picture on a scrap of old ledger paper and left it on Grant's desk. It showed 3 stick figures, one tall, one small, and one with a big cowboy hat. Grant found himself staring at it longer than he wanted to admit. That night, as he walked the fence line at dusk, Cal rode up beside him. "She's a hard worker," Cal said. "Good food, too." "She's temporary," Grant replied. "Sure," Cal said, giving him a look. "You say that like you believe it." When he returned to the house, Teddy was asleep on the rug near the fire. Claire was reading an old novel from the shelf, her feet tucked under her. "I'll move him," she said softly, rising. "I'll do it," Grant said before he could stop himself. He lifted the boy gently, surprised at how light he was. Teddy stirred, murmured something sleepy, and nestled into his shoulder. The smell of dust and soap clung to him. Grant carried him to the spare room, laid him down, and pulled the quilt over his small frame. When he returned, Claire stood in the hallway, hands folded. "Thank you," she said. Grant only nodded. He went to bed that night with the weight of the boy's small warmth still lingering on his shirt. He didn't know what this week would bring, didn't want to think about what came after. All he knew was that the house no longer felt like a tomb, and for the first time in years, he hadn't eaten dinner alone. And for now, that was enough. The sun came up slow the next morning, as if it too was curious about the changes happening inside the McAllister ranch house. The rooster's cry was no louder than usual, but it carried a different tone, echoed across clean window panes and freshly swept steps. The porch boards no longer moaned under years of dirt. Claire had scrubbed them the night before, and her touch lingered like polish even in silence. Grant sat at the edge of his bed longer than usual, boots still beside him. Something had shifted, just slightly, but enough that he noticed the stillness wasn't quite the same. There was a smell in the air. Baking bread? Or maybe it was cinnamon again. Whatever it wasn't his doing. That alone stirred unease. When he did finally dress and come downstairs, the kitchen was already humming with quiet activity. Claire moved like she'd been born into the space, her sleeves rolled, her hair pinned back neatly. Her face, though pale from fatigue, was focused and composed. She stirred oatmeal in a large pot, turned bacon with a practiced hand, and didn't look up when he entered. "Morning," she said simply, like it was a habit between them. Grant grunted something like a greeting and reached for his coffee. The pot was fresh, hot, not the bitter afterthought he'd gotten used to making himself. Beside it, someone had placed a folded cloth napkin. Claire had. Of course she had. Teddy sat at the table with his legs swinging, mumbling a song under his breath. His face was still round with sleep, but his eyes lit up when he saw Grant. "Good morning, Mr. McAllister." Grant paused. No one had said good morning to him in years, not like that. The boy's voice was clear and kind, no sign of fear or hesitance. "Morning, Teddy." Teddy smiled and went back to peeling the crust off a piece of toast. Grant sat down and tried to ignore the way the table looked, more lived in than it had since Evelyn died. There were clean plates stacked, a bowl of butter, a dish of jam. Jam! When was the last time there'd been jam in the house? Claire brought over a plate for him without asking. Eggs, bacon, a biscuit, and a small dish of those green beans left over from supper. He glanced at it, then up at her. She met his gaze but said nothing. There was no pride in her eyes, only efficiency. She wasn't trying to impress. She was doing a job. That was harder to ignore than praise. He ate in silence, the only sound being the scrape of forks and the soft hum of Teddy's tune. When he finished, Claire collected his plate, wiped the table, and poured more coffee into his cup without a word. The silence was not uncomfortable. Not exactly. "I'll be in the east pasture," Grant finally muttered, pushing back from the table. "Understood," Claire replied. Teddy waved. "Bye, Mr. McAllister." Grant hesitated, hand on the doorframe. He glanced back. The boy's hand was up in earnest farewell. Grant nodded, the corner of his mouth twitching despite himself. The east pasture was quiet. The cattle were docile, chewing at the dry grass with the steady rhythm of contented beasts. Cal met him at the fence, tightening a gatepost. "She's still here," Cal said, like it was some kind of victory. "She's got 4 days left," Grant said. "And the boy?" "Quiet, keeps to himself." Cal smirked. "Sounds like someone else I know." Grant ignored that and focused on the gate. But even as he worked, his mind wasn't fully on the task. His eyes kept drifting east, toward the house, picturing the way Claire's hands moved across the countertop, how she stirred without waste, how she looked at Teddy with a fierceness that startled him. She wasn't soft, she was careful. That made him want to ask questions he didn't have the right to ask. By noon, the sun was hot and unforgiving. Grant rode back toward the house with dust on his hat brim and sweat darkening his collar. The smell of stew hit him before he reached the porch. Rich, savory, with thyme and something sweet. Carrot, maybe. Inside, the table was set again, bowls ready. Claire didn't look up when he entered. She ladled stew into bowls, handed one to Teddy, and set the other at Grant's seat without being asked. The stew was good. Damn good. He said nothing. But she must have noticed, because she didn't sit down to eat herself until he'd taken 3 full bites. "Your cattle look strong," she said quietly, as if making neutral conversation. "They're holding. You raise them for sale?" "Mostly. Some for breeding. We send a few down to Wyoming each year." She nodded. "My uncle worked a cattle ranch once, outside Dodge City. Used to say cows made better company than people." Grant let out a short huff. He wasn't wrong. She smiled faintly but didn't press. Teddy slurped his stew with approval, then looked between them. "Can I go see the horses again later?" Grant hesitated. "Ask your mother." Claire looked up from her bowl. "So long as you stay on the fence line and don't go inside the pen." "I won't." Teddy bounced in his seat. "I just want to watch 'em run." Grant surprised himself. "I'll show you the gelding if you like." "He's new." Teddy's eyes widened. "Really?" Claire looked at Grant, surprised. He shrugged. "Only if your chores are done," she said quickly, hiding the shake in her voice. "They're done," Teddy beamed. The boy ran out into the yard like a bird set loose. Grant stood a moment, feeling awkward, then turned to follow. Claire watched them go from the porch, arms folded, her expression unreadable. Grant didn't speak much as he showed the boy the new gelding, just pointed, explained the markings, the breed, the difference between a working horse and one you could trust with a child. Teddy soaked it in like a sponge, eyes wide, nodding solemnly. "Is he fast?" Teddy asked, pointing to the gelding's flanks. "Faster than most." "Faster than bandits?" Grant chuckled, actually chuckled. "Could outrun a whole gang of them." Teddy grinned, delighted. They returned to the house just before supper. Claire had baked cornbread and served stew again, thicker now with beans and strips of meat. She'd made sweet tea from a bag someone must have left months ago. After dinner, Grant lingered. He pretended to study his boots, then wandered into the parlor while Claire and Teddy tidied up. He didn't like how the fire was already burning warm in the hearth. He hadn't lit it. She had. It was cozy, yes, but it also made him remember sitting there with Evelyn, her hands knitting in her lap, her laugh in his ear. He hated that memory and clung to it all at once. Teddy curled up on a cushion on the floor, playing with his wooden horse again. Claire read from a book she'd found on the shelf, something about a mouse and a princess. Her voice was gentle, rhythmic, not sing-song, not theatrical, just soothing. When she closed the book, Teddy was nearly asleep. "I'll carry him," Grant said again, already kneeling. Claire didn't stop him. She watched as he lifted the boy and disappeared down the hall. Footsteps soft. When he returned, she was still standing there, hands wrapped in her apron. "You don't have to do that," she said. "Carry him, I mean. He's light. He's not your responsibility. He's under my roof." She looked away. "Just for the week." Grant nodded slowly. "Just the week." But the way she stood there, the way her voice softened just enough, made it feel like they both knew that wasn't the truth anymore. Later that night, as Grant sat in the dark, listening to the wind scratch against the shutters, he stared at the drawing Teddy had left on his desk. The 3 stick figures again. The big man with the cowboy hat, the woman with yellow scribbled hair, and the boy with a smile too wide for his face. He didn't sleep easily. But for the first time in 5 years, he didn't wake up alone in the house. That realization didn't haunt him the way he expected. It didn't comfort him either. It just was. In the days that followed, Claire continued her duties with quiet efficiency. Laundry hung neatly. Floors gleamed. Meals came hot and timed. She said little unless spoken to, but the silence between them grew less stiff, more lived in. She was not trying to charm him. She wasn't even trying to be liked. That, more than anything, made him notice her. Teddy followed him to the barn one morning and asked if cows had best friends. Grant had no idea how to answer that. Claire laughed when he told her, the sound sudden and bright in the morning air. "I'm serious," he'd said, flustered. "I believe you," she replied, still chuckling. That night, as Grant lay in bed, listening to the wind howl and the rafters groan, he realized something had changed. He no longer dreaded the mornings. He no longer hated coming inside. And the silence, the terrible, oppressive silence that had wrapped around the house like a death shroud, had lifted just enough to let in the sound of a child's laughter, the clink of dishes, the soft voice of a woman reading out loud. He didn't know what would happen at the end of the week, but he knew that if he sent them away, the silence would return. And this time, he wasn't sure he'd survive it. The mornings came earlier now, or so it seemed to Claire, though she knew the sun didn't change for any one person's sorrow or hope. She rose before the rooster, tied her hair back in the dim light, and moved barefoot through the kitchen, her steps practiced, her motions deliberate. The floor, freshly scrubbed, no longer creaked beneath her weight. She didn't want to wake Teddy yet. He'd been dreaming again, soft murmurs in his sleep, smiles blooming unbidden on his small, round face. It was strange how quickly the rhythm of this place had embedded itself in her bones. She knew which drawer held the cutlery, where the matches were kept, how the pantry leaned to the right when she stepped too close. She knew the smell of Grant McAllister's tobacco, though he rarely smoked inside. She knew the soft snort of the gelding outside her window. She knew the sound of his boots across the porch. Solid, slow, one step heavier than the other. She didn't let herself think too deeply about that knowledge. She'd learned long ago not to linger too long on the things she couldn't have. The stew was already simmering when she heard the front door open. She didn't look up right away. She kept stirring, listening to the sound of his coat being hung on the hook, the rasp of his sleeve as he wiped his brow. "Morning," he said, his voice still deep with sleep. "Good morning," she replied. She turned then, met his gaze just long enough to show she wasn't avoiding it. She never did. Claire had learned that truth earned trust. And Grant, for all his quiet, was a man who noticed things. You couldn't hide your trembling hands or tired eyes and expect him not to see. "You were up early," he said, pouring coffee. "I've always been." "Teddy still asleep?" "For a little while longer, I hope. He wore himself out chasing chickens." Grant smiled. Just a small pull at the corner of his mouth, but it stayed longer than usual. "You've made this place feel different," he said after a pause. "Like it ain't all dust and ghosts anymore." Claire stiffened slightly, unsure how to respond. "I don't mean it wrong," he added quickly. "Just, it's quieter, but not in that dead kind of way. There's life in the stillness now." "Thank you," she said, voice low. "That's kind." She didn't say it felt like a fragile dream, like she was borrowing peace that didn't belong to her. By late morning, the boy was up and chasing his shadow around the barn again, laughing as if the world had never hurt him. Grant watched from the porch, arms crossed, mug in hand. "He's got no idea what he's done," he muttered. Claire stood beside him, drying her hands on a towel. "Done?" Brought noise back to a place that forgot how to listen. She looked down. "He's loud, I know." "I didn't say that." "I can keep him quiet if it bothers you." Grant turned to her, his expression unreadable. "It doesn't bother me." Claire nodded, but something inside her curled in on itself like paper over flame. Compliments were dangerous. They loosened the knots she tied so tightly to keep her heart safe. And she couldn't afford to want anything from this man, no matter how gently he spoke. But she wasn't the only one hiding things. That afternoon, Cal rode up fast and tight in the saddle, face stern. "Somebody was in town asking about you," he told Grant. "Not from around here." Grant raised a brow. "Who?" "Tall fella, slick hair. Said he was looking for a woman named Claire Davison." Claire froze on the porch steps, breath caught in her chest. Her fingers tightened around the handle of the laundry basket she was holding. "Did he say what for?" Grant asked, but his voice had already dropped an octave. Cal shook his head. "Didn't say much, just that he was asking around. Bought drinks for a few of the regulars. Got 'em talking." Claire set the basket down, slowly, and forced her legs to move down the steps. "It's him," she said. "Henry Langford." Grant looked at her, sharp and assessing. "You know him?" She nodded. He's the boy's father." Silence fell like a stone between them. "I thought you said you came from Kansas City," Cal said cautiously. "I did. That's where he left us. When I told him I was pregnant, he disappeared. I didn't know where he'd gone. Until now." Grant's jaw tightened. "Why would he come looking after all this time?" "I don't know, but he's not coming for Teddy. He never wanted him." "Then, what does he want?" "Maybe he wants to ruin me. He's done it before." Grant said nothing for a long moment. Then he turned to Cal. "If you hear more, you come straight to me." Cal nodded, his eyes lingering on Claire with something like concern. When he rode off, Claire sat down hard on the edge of the porch. Her hands trembled, her breath shallow. Grant stood nearby, uncertain. "You're not safe with him," she whispered. "I'm not afraid of men like him." "I am." Grant's voice softened. "Then you don't face him alone." Claire looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You don't know what he's capable of." "Then tell me." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The words twisted in her throat like barbed wire. "I was 17 when I met him," she said finally. "He was charming, dangerous in that way that makes you forget you should run. He told me I was beautiful, promised me a life I didn't believe I deserved. When I told him I was expecting, he laughed, said I'd ruined everything. Then he told people I'd stolen from him, said I took money and ran. They believed him. I lost my job, my room at the boarding house. I lived in alleys until Teddy came." Grant's hands curled into fists. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" "Because it's not your burden. I offered you a roof. That makes it mine." "No," she said fiercely. "It makes it mine. I'll carry it until I'm buried." Grant stared at her, stunned into silence. That night, Claire didn't sleep. She paced the room while Teddy dreamed of horses and stars. She watched the moon slide across the windowpane like a ghost trying to get in, and she wondered if she should run. She'd done it before, left behind towns, jobs, people, all for Teddy, all so he'd never have to see the man who had broken her. But now there was this place, this porch, that voice in the kitchen, the sound of Grant's boots across the floor, the stillness that wasn't hollow anymore. Could she give that up again? Could she survive it? The next morning, Grant rode out early. Claire stood on the porch, watching him disappear across the hills, her heart full of stones. She had no illusions. Henry would come. She just didn't know when. Inside the house, Teddy was drawing again. This time, it was the three of them on horseback. "Mama," he said, holding up the picture, "that's me. That's you. And that's Mr. McAllister." Claire smiled, though it cracked her. "Why does he have a hat that big?" she teased. "He's a cowboy. Cowboys always wear big hats." "Of course they do." Teddy leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Do you think he likes us?" Claire hesitated. I think he's learning how." That night, the wind picked up again, sharper now, more restless. Claire locked every door. She kept the lamp low. She stayed close to Teddy's room, ears sharp for the sound of wagon wheels, footsteps, anything that didn't belong. And when Grant returned just past dusk, covered in dust and wearing the weight of something unspoken, she knew what he was going to say before he said it. He was in town again. Her stomach turned. "Said he's coming to see you. Tomorrow." Claire closed her eyes. "I'll be ready," she said, but she didn't know what ready looked like anymore. Grant reached out then, a motion so uncharacteristic she flinched, but he didn't touch her, just hovered near her shoulder, steady and firm. "You don't have to fight alone." "I always have. You don't have to anymore." That was the night Claire wept in silence, standing over her sleeping son, one hand on his back, the other on her own chest, trying to hold herself together. In the shadows of that ranch house, something had changed. It was no longer just a shelter. It was a choice, and soon someone would try to take that away. But not without a fight. Not this time. The wind that morning didn't blow like it usually did across the Montana plains. It slashed, it whispered, it carried with it a feeling Claire couldn't shake. It wasn't just the wind that made her tighten her shawl around her shoulders or double-check the bolt on the back door. There was something else in the air, an unease that pressed against her chest like the calm before a storm. She didn't need the sky to tell her what she already knew. Henry Langford was coming. She'd slept little the night before, though Teddy had curled into her side, blissfully unaware, soft snores brushing against her shoulder. She hadn't told him anything. Not about the man, not about the danger, not about the possibility that they'd have to run again. She couldn't bring herself to shatter what little normalcy he'd found here. And besides, part of her, some buried part she dared not nourish, was hoping they wouldn't have to run. That maybe, just maybe, things would be different this time. By the time Grant returned from the pasture, the sky had begun to gray, clouds moving in, fast and low. He said nothing as he dismounted, his eyes already scanning the horizon. Claire met him on the porch, her hands trembling beneath her apron, though her face stayed calm. "He'll be here by noon," Grant said, jaw tight. She nodded. "I won't let him touch you. Or the boy. You don't know what he's like. I don't have to." They stood there in silence, the kind that isn't empty, but full of every unspoken thing. She wanted to thank him. She wanted to tell him how long it had been since someone stood between her and a storm. But she didn't say a word. Just turned and went back into the house, stirring the stew that none of them would eat, setting the table like the world hadn't tilted. When the wagon wheels finally crunched up the long gravel drive, Claire was already at the door. Her hands clenched the fabric of her skirt so tightly her knuckles went white. Teddy was in his room, napping, and she prayed he'd stay asleep just a little longer. Grant stepped out first, his silhouette tall and unmoving, a statue cast in flesh and grit. The man who climbed down from the wagon was exactly as she remembered. Smiling lips with nothing behind the eyes, slicked hair, a silver watch chain glinting on his vest. He looked like someone who'd never worked a day with his hands but could talk a man out of his boots with a grin and a lie. "Well," Henry Langford said, sweeping off his hat, "don't you look like something out of a dime novel, standing all heroic in the doorway?" Grant said nothing. Henry turned to Claire. "Claire, darling, you've been difficult to find, but not impossible." "You've found me," she said flatly. "What do you want?" He smiled. "Straight to the point. I always liked that about you. Get off this land. Is that any way to greet an old friend? I came all this way just to say hello." "You don't come for hellos," she said. "You come for leverage." He stepped forward, but Grant took a single step between them, blocking his path. Henry chuckled. "I see. The rancher's taken a liking to you." "Leave," Grant said, his voice low and dangerous. But Henry only looked amused. "You don't even know what she's hiding, do you? I mean, it's admirable, this little act. Cooking, cleaning, playing mother and wife. But it's just that. An act." "I told him everything," Claire said quickly. "Did you now?" Henry turned to her. "Did you tell him about the watch?" Grant's gaze shifted slightly. Henry laughed. "Ah, I see. Maybe not everything." "She didn't steal anything," Grant said. "Of course not," Henry replied. "Not in the eyes of the law. No charges stuck. No trial. Just a young girl dismissed in disgrace from the boarding house where I, oh so generously, got her work." She left with a silver pocket watch in her trunk. "Family heirloom, my grandmother's, or so I said." It made for quite the tale. "You lied," Claire said, trembling. "You lied to punish me. And it worked. You ran. You always run." "She's not running now," Grant said. Henry's eyes narrowed. "You don't want to do this," he said. "Oh, I do." They stood like that for several heartbeats. Claire barely breathing, the sky grumbling above. "I could ruin you," Henry said, stepping closer. "You think this ranch means something to the law. You harbor a known thief, past accusations or not, and it won't take much to stir things up. Men like me know the right people." "I said," Grant growled. "Leave." Henry's smile vanished. And then Grant did something Claire didn't expect. He reached behind the door and pulled out his shotgun. Not raised, not threatening, just resting it across his arms, like a man who'd protect what was his. "I don't take kindly to threats, and I don't take kindly to men who scare women and children." Henry's face paled slightly. "You can't shoot me," he sneered. "I won't have to if you're smart." Henry stepped back, fury simmering just beneath the surface. "This isn't over. It is for you." Henry spat at the dirt, climbed back into his wagon, and whipped the reins. The mule hesitated, then started down the road, leaving a trail of dust in its wake. When he was gone, Claire collapsed onto the porch steps, her chest heaving. Grant crouched beside her, placing a steadying hand on her back. "I told you," he said gently. "You're not alone." Her tears came then, not loud or theatrical, but soft, worn-out tears, the kind that had waited too long to be shed. She cried for the fear, for the years she'd run, for the boy inside sleeping peacefully, unaware of the bullet they'd just dodged. Teddy awoke hours later, smiling, unaware that anything had happened. He ate his stew, showed Grant another drawing, and climbed into Claire's lap by the fire. She held him tighter than usual. Grant sat across the room, watching them. "She'll have to leave," a voice in his head whispered. "She'll go, like they all do, like the silence always comes back." But another voice, fainter, warmer, countered. She could stay. The storm passed that night, but not before lashing the house with sheets of rain and thunder like drums. Grant stood by the window, staring into the dark. Claire appeared beside him, silent. "I'm sorry you had to do that," she said. "I'm not. Most men would have sent us packing, said it was too much trouble. I'm not most men." She looked up at him, something unreadable in her eyes. "No," she said. "You're not." They stood there, watching the lightning ripple across the land. In that moment, the house was no longer haunted. It was becoming something else, something new. The days that followed the storm were bright, as if the land itself had taken a deep breath. The fields drank the rain like salvation, and the dust settled enough that you could see the tracks of every bird and every boot that crossed the yard. The air smelled clean again, fresh with grass and earth, and the wind came soft, humming through the trees like a lullaby. But for all its peace, the ranch still held its breath. Claire moved through the house like someone exhaling slowly, unsure if the danger had truly passed. The image of Henry's face, twisted with fury, still hovered at the edge of her thoughts. But each time it crept close, she clung to the moment Grant stepped between them, to the sight of him standing solid and unmoving with that shotgun resting in his arms. No one had ever protected her like that. No one had ever said with their actions more than their words that she was worth defending. She didn't know what to do with that truth. She didn't know how to let it settle without fearing it would vanish. The mornings returned to their rhythm. Teddy ran barefoot through the grass, his laugh chasing birds into flight. The chickens resumed their clucking complaints. Claire returned to her baking and sweeping, her hands busy even when her thoughts wandered. But Grant had changed. He didn't just pass through the house anymore. He lingered. He watched her when she thought he wasn't looking. He helped more, carrying firewood, lifting water buckets, even fixing the front step without being asked. One afternoon, he handed her a small bunch of wildflowers. He said they were growing near the north fence and looked like the color of her dress. She stared at them like they were made of gold. He looked away quickly, uncomfortable, but she took them and placed them in a jar on the windowsill. Every time she passed them, her heart stirred. Then came the evening Grant didn't leave after supper. He stayed in the kitchen, sipping his coffee while Claire dried dishes. Teddy sat on the floor playing with a stick he'd carved into the shape of a horse. The air was quiet but warm, like it held something waiting to be spoken. Claire finally broke the silence. "He never told me about her." Grant looked up slowly. "Your wife." He set the mug down. "Not much to tell that would make sense now." "Tell me anyway." He paused, then sighed. "Evelyn. She was different, laughed loud, cooked with too much butter, danced when no one was playing music, drove me mad sometimes, but I couldn't breathe without her." Claire's throat tightened. "She got sick," he said. "Cancer, they think. We didn't call it that back then. Just said her body was turning against itself. She wasted away slow, and I wasted away with her. I'm sorry." He looked at her. "You remind me of her." Claire blinked. "I do?" "Not because you're alike. You're not. You're quiet where she was loud, careful where she was wild. But you've got that same fire underneath, same way of looking at something like you already survived it." Claire lowered her gaze. "She would have liked you," he said. Claire didn't know what to say to that. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded the last towel. Grant noticed. "You're thinking of leaving." She nodded. "Why? I don't want to bring more trouble. Henry might come back. He might tell lies. And this ranch, You don't need that. I need peace." Claire looked up. "And it started when you came." The silence that followed wrapped around them like a blanket, not heavy, but full. "You think Teddy would mind if I took him riding tomorrow?" Grant asked, changing the subject. Claire smiled through the tears that blurred her vision. "He'd love that." The next day, Grant helped Teddy into the saddle, the boy clinging to the horn with both hands and grinning so wide his cheeks hurt. Claire watched from the porch, arms crossed, heart full. They rode slow, along the fence line, Grant leading the horse, Teddy chattering about outlaws and mustangs and how one day he'd ride to California. When they returned, Grant lifted him down with care, ruffled his hair, and sent him running inside to tell his mother all about it. Claire stood waiting. "He's happy here," she said. "So are you," Grant replied. "I didn't think I could be anymore." "I didn't either." That night, Claire stepped into the parlor and found Grant sitting near the fire, a book open in his lap. He looked up, expectant. "I can't sleep," she said softly. He gestured to the chair across from him. She sat. They didn't speak for a long while. Finally, Claire whispered, "What are we doing?" Grant looked into the fire. "I don't know," he said, "but I know what I'd like to do." "What's that?" He turned to her. "I'd like to ask you to stay. Not just for the week, not just until things feel safe, but to stay, for good." Her breath caught. "I'd like to ask you to be my wife," he said. "Not because you need saving, but because I do." Claire pressed a hand to her mouth. "I'm not the woman you lost. I'm not the man I was then either. You'd take me with all my past? I'd take you with all your tomorrows." She closed her eyes. "And Teddy? He's already got me wrapped around his finger." When she opened her eyes, they were wet. "Yes," she said. The days that followed moved like something out of someone else's story. The ranch buzzed with quiet joy. The hands noticed but said nothing. They nodded a little more, smiled more. Cal tipped his hat and said, "About time." The wedding was small, just them, Cal as witness, and Teddy standing proudly with a flower tucked behind his ear. Claire wore a simple dress, one she'd mended herself. Grant wore his best shirt. They said vows under the cottonwood tree near the stream, the one that bloomed early every year. Afterward, they shared stew and bread and pie on the porch. Teddy fell asleep in Claire's lap before the stars came out. Grant looked at her across the dark yard, his hand finding hers. "You really staying?" he asked, a smile in his voice. "I already did." He kissed her then, soft and sure, and the wind carried their laughter far across the fields. Inside, the house that had once been silent, once hollow, now held the heartbeat of something new, a family, a future, and the promise of a love that had been earned, not given. In a world where silence once ruled and love seemed buried beneath years of sorrow, a widowed rancher and a weary mother found something neither expected, a second chance, not just at love, but at family, at belonging, and at peace. Some hearts don't need to be fixed, they just need to be chosen. And on the wide open plains of Montana, two souls chose each other, completely, finally, and forever. If you were moved by Grant and Claire's journey, don't forget, there are many more untamed hearts and unforgettable tales waiting for you. Subscribe now to Wild West Love Chronicles and ride with us through every heartfelt twist, every dusty road, and every love story that stands the test of time. Your next favorite story is just one sunset away.